Right, okay. So on Owler, we've got all the materials that you need in terms of the learning outcomes. I've also gone through on Management Direct, that's the CMI resource, and look for additional videos, look for fact sheets, look for things that will help you. Also, after every session, I will create the video of the session and I'll upload that as well on Owler. That tends to take a couple of hours to create just because of the time of the sessions. So it probably wouldn't be up there till tonight. Is there anything else that would be useful for you to have on Owler that I could add to it?
Don't think so.
Okay, if there is anything that you can think of. Another thing that I had a look when I was sort of getting Owler ready, there's reading lists that have been generated specifically for this course, that have been generated by when they've been establishing the course and putting it through the Board of Study. And so on the general module information, you'll see there's a drop-down box and you can pick this course, and all the reading lists are available online. So you might find those useful as well if you wanted to get some really good sources that are a mixture of those. So please, have a look through those if that's helpful. What we're going to look at today, so what we're doing is we're going to do one learning outcome a week. I've stripped out a lot of the contents from the full-time course where it goes into a lot of depth, or it's not where it goes into a lot of depth, but where it's almost like a distraction. And I've tried to keep it so we've got some really good content that you can then choose to apply or not to your both assignments. So today we're looking at this learning outcome 2 that we're going to be focusing on today, which is about contemporary research, which is why I asked you to do the pre-work. In terms of contemporary research, the material for the course is so old that none of it's contemporary anyway. So when I'm preparing it, I think this is all. So what I'd like you to, that's why I want you to bring it to life. So I'll show you some of the things that are moving, and then we'll try and take it to like what direction they're going in. So this is your chance to do some research and really look at, especially as the organisations you're looking at, the change will have been in the last 3 years. So actually, is it sort of cutting edge in terms of how they're managing or leading? So we'll look today at the resource approach for the organisation and how they develop the strategy based on what they've got and what they're able to do. We'll look at how change is managed, and we'll look at how we structure the organisation to deliver. And then we'll also have a brief look at how we get people on board in terms of making things happen. Now, I'm really conscious your first assignment is only 1,000 words, which isn't very much. And so for those of you that I've already talked about, like a few of you have got in touch about your ideas, what you need to do is keep it really, really specific in terms of the sort of change that they've done, and ideally really one rather than a ripple of lots of different changes. If you found an organisation that's got a number of different things that has happened, you're probably better off looking at that one for assessment 2. So if it's got, whereas this one, you're better looking at one change and then really using quite a lot of depth with the different models and critiquing how they've gone about it. And also, is it still relevant given how things have changed recently? Okay. So we're looking at, today we're looking at contemporary research on leading and managing. So to start off with, we're going to look at where change can come from in terms of like what reasons, where organisations look to shape their strategy. So one way of doing this is, as I mentioned before, this idea of a resource-based approach for the organisation. So it's looking at what they're really good at and actually what they should buy in or what they should develop themselves based on their core competencies. Have any of you got examples of organisations that you've worked at where they've made a decision to either take things in-house or actually outsource things recently? So that, can you sort of share any examples of that?
Could we talk about charity?
Well, with this one, in terms of the assignment, you must just talk about like I'm just asking to bring the contents to life a little bit. So Humaira, look at the assignment brief. You've got to do an airline for both assignments. Okay. So has anyone got any examples at work where you've shifted from making or doing it yourself to outsourcing or the other way around?
Morning, Hannah, it's Jason.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, that's a bad morning all. So I think in JLR there was originally with the kind of logistics of parts in facilities like manufacturing, we
Yeah.
used to do a lot of it in-house. But recent years, well, a good few years ago, we kind of outsourced it to DHL.
Okay.
So
And what was the decision based on? Why did they decide to go that route?
I think because of the size of the operation continued to grow. So I think it was hard for the company, JLR, well, it was Jaguar Land Rover at the same time. I think it was owned by BMW at the time.
Mhm.
And because it was growing so rapidly, they had to kind of outsource the management of the parts
Yeah.
logistically, because it obviously would have continued to grow with the size of the business when it started to develop. So I'm not too sure what the other kind of implications were, but
I think there's often, if you're growing, what you want to do. But if I mute anyone, I'm not being rude. Unmute yourself, but just just want to hear the toilet flushing. That'll get a bit worried. But let's have a look.
Toilet flusher.
Yeah, it won't be mine. Okay. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is if you're growing, you've got so much that you need to do anyway that actually you might look, it doesn't necessarily make sense to keep everything under your control. The reason why organisations want to do as much as possible is about control, it's about controlling quality. But the idea with this is if it's not your core competency and it doesn't really add value, why wouldn't you pay someone else to do it and then they take the risk? Because actually, especially with an organisation that might incur fines to their suppliers if they don't do it on time, you know, you're starting to you're taking that extra process out of what you're focused on. And if you've got a lot else that you've got to do, you want to simplify it really, and you want to make sure that you're focusing on the stuff where you can add value and add really sort of based on your resources. So
stability.
Yeah, and shift the yeah, absolutely. And then they, especially if it gets more complex to make, in the sense of there might be additional sort of legislation and warranties or standards that come into play. You don't necessarily want to be doing that if that's not your core business. You know, you want an organisation that specialises on that. That's their problem really.
Does it also fit in about the way that an organisation does something and that's the way they think they should do it versus bringing in a service where actually it's best in class service from someone else because they're the ones that are leading in actually because they work with many other organisations that do the same thing, so they've refined their offering over time to actually be better than actually the company that is thinking about taking that service on could ever be.
Absolutely, and yeah, if they're best in class because that's their core competency. So you're absolutely right, especially if cost-wise it works out similar because they're doing so much volume. They're best in class. You're getting the benefit of their innovation by outsourcing it. The only risk associated with it is just this idea of absolute control. But then you don't have to have the storage facility for it. You know, you can sort of negotiate how that relationship's going to be. So it's sort of almost stripping out, isn't it? Certain elements that you like, they're the specialists at that. So we're going to focus on the bits that give us that added value.
So I know in veterinary practice, one of the big things that's quite popular at the minute is having like a practice health plan where clients pay direct debit each month and they get all their preventative healthcare. And I know that the financial dealing side of it, doing the direct debits and making sure everything's sort of legally correct is quite difficult. So I know that we would be able to set what we wanted to offer on our plan, but everything else was outsourced to a company that would take the direct debits and do the reminders, make sure everything's sort of above board and correct without having to have that worry, because obviously there's nobody really that financially minded, I wouldn't have thought, to be able to set all that up within a veterinary practice.
Yeah, and that's another reason. It's about risk, isn't it, and making sure that something's flowing and happening, and for that you pay a cost, but actually the cost is so much better than trying to train the staff in-house to do it, trying to change what they do, trying to change their mindset, and especially where you've got the financial regulations potentially of taking direct debits and the processes. That's really
like to say there's literally just not the time to process everything, I don't think.
No, and the most extreme example I've ever seen of this was a family printing company, because printing went from sort of litho, which was like huge presses, to digital, and it meant that all the machinery, all the equipment that they used to need wasn't necessarily the same anymore. And it also, and that was their competitive advantage. The barriers to entry were the investment in this equipment. And he used to go to networking events, and this person who owned the printing company came along, and they completely changed their printing business to the point that they became print brokers, because what they were fantastic at was they'd got so many relationships with other printing companies that and they were really good at sales. So if you got a printing need, you'd go to them, you tell them what you needed, they'd look at what the options were, and then they'd contact people and they'd add a margin onto it. So basically they turned from being printers to sales brokers, really. So they actually got rid of their factories, they got rid of all their equipment, because they realised that their capabilities were around fulfilling customer need, matching need with supply, rather than the actual printing process. So that's their value added was about the customer relationships and the contacts. It wasn't about the printing process, even though that's what they were selling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So something to bear in mind as well, intellectual property is another reason where you might want to be careful as to whether you outsource things or not. So just to make sure that you retain. So it might just be that you put certain agreements in place, but you need to give that some thought, really, in terms of where your capabilities lie. So
Hannah,
you really,
sorry, just before we go on, can you do me a favour? I don't know whether anyone else has experienced it. Can you move your mic down just a touch?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it at the right angle, and it's either too low and you can't hear. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can. I can hear you perfectly. Yeah. I hope everyone else can. Sorry.
No, thank you for saying, because otherwise you end up booming for, and if you listen to it again, that's really unpleasant. No, thanks. So we really need to identify what we offer, and actually, does it make money as well? Because back to this idea of the print company, where they realised they weren't actually making money on holding all this equipment, servicing, etc. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at what's going on in the marketplace. How good are they? Where can we cut costs? Where can we add value? Looking at your team as well, because it might be that you don't need, if you're outsourcing a particular function, you might find that some of the employees go with it to that supplier, and actually it's their experience, because you no longer want to produce that in-house. And then you also really need to understand your supply networks and your customer expectations. And so it's sort of a matching process of bringing this all together, but almost being brave enough to not try and do everything, because if you try and do that, you're just distracted, and you can't necessarily grow in volume then in the way that you'd like. So that's sort of one way. So I'm just thinking, I think part of this could be of relevance to your assignments, but you possibly just really, with the assignments, you really need to just focus on where there's application and what's directly relevant to your position, rather than explaining the options, because we just want to know what they did and why they did it, and try and understand the process they went through. There's something I'm going to show you shortly, which is a value chain, and it's about understanding the process of what's coming into the organisation, the transformation, what's going out, but then the layers around it. So like that could be even like HR functions. Some small organisations will outsource those. Definitely like there are sort of IT support companies. There are various bits. So it's sort of working out which layers you want to and need to maintain control of internally, and which ones you're really better off having a strategic relationship with. So you sort of break down this process. In terms of the assets that we've got our physical assets in terms of creating, if we're doing a product. The intangible assets, now this is really important in terms of intellectual property, but also about reputation. So this is why companies will actually buy brands, even if they even the brand Woolworths, the one that went bust a number of years ago, where you might have bought your pick and mix from or whatever. It's actually an online brand now. So somewhere someone has seen that as having an asset, as a sort of a value to it. So that's why Tata would have seen that JLR fit within the portfolio that they wanted to develop, because it's about their reputation. And that's absolutely why Tata wouldn't have then changed JLR's brand to Tata, because that would have diminished the whole reason why they did it. And then we're also looking at what we're really good at as an organisation. What skills have we got? Who are we recruiting? What's the market look like? What's the culture of the relationship as well? So we're sort of looking internally at everything that we've got, both things we can touch, people, but also our reputation as resources, and how can we best utilise those to make the most money that we can. So this is all. If you wanted to do further research on this, it's called the resource-based view of the firm. The challenge with this, because we're looking at what have we got, how can we take it forwards, and how can we make the most of it to create a unique position in the market and one that's relevant to the market. It is seen as quite a sort of, I wouldn't say cutting edge, because it's not that, but it's certainly a sort of contemporary way of looking at management, that we're looking at what have we got and how do we use it best. Are there any limitations to it? So let's think of our critical analysis. What's going to be the problem with taking this approach? There is one that's quite like from, so when I was thinking of it and I was presenting the material to you, it's great because we're making the most of what we've got. The thing that I see as a major holdback with this is you're looking at your current resource, and actually does that mean, because you could buy in other things, you could recruit other people, so there is a risk that we're not innovating because we're just using what we've currently got, and that there's nothing wrong in that, but actually are we missing a trick? Could we you know, are there opportunities that we haven't explored? So I think if we were looking at the critical analysis of this, and you might look at whether your strategy, the organisation you're looking at and what they've done, have they done it based on the resources that they've got? Is that the approach that they've used? So yeah, do sort of just be a little bit critical in case there's something else they could have done, but because they haven't got the resource, they're sort of missing what they could have done. Have you seen the value chain before?
No. Or actually.
And has anyone seen it in terms of courses that modules that you've done in the past?
Oh yeah.
Let me explain how it works then. So this is, at the bottom we've got the arrows, and the arrows go from get materials in, creating something from them in terms of manufacturing them, with then taking them to market through, so that's through, could be sales agents, could be garages. We're then looking at whether we distribute them in a different way, actually. So we might be, if it's an online service, it might be, you know, through different models now that we've got available to get it out there. And then actually, how do we increase customer service and engagement? So we've got a whole process at the bottom, from getting the raw materials in to servicing customers. And that's almost like the journey of the item through from the conception through to the delivery and ongoing servicing. And then the levels we've got above that are about organisational functions. So it could be about research and development that we use. We might do that internally, but actually, if we're really good at manufacturing, that's our core competency, we might work with an external consultancy, and it might even be an alliance on a university project. So we work with a university, because I know that certainly in the automotive, the government has these sort of funds where there's a number of parties involved. So you might have a design consultancy, you might have a manufacturer, and you might have a university working together in terms of a different type of sort of electric vehicle or some sort of technology change. Another thing that you can look at is how you buy in from organisations. So the sort of the supplier procurement process, and then so these are sort of, they are additional skills, additional resource that you've got available to you that might be internal or external, but it supports the resource that you deliver. So we'll have this procurement department, and then we'll also have within your organisation the different functions that you've got. So could be accounts, could be HR, could be IT, but also the leadership and the people in it that support the delivery of that. So it's a sort of way of dissecting where you're really good, because actually you might outsource certain parts of it, like the marketing and selling, if that's not your bag. If you're a little manufacturer in Coventry that's actually brilliant at producing what they do, but then they're aligned with another organisation that then takes the products to market. So it sort of allows you to break down the organisation and focus on the key elements where you add value and where you've got a competitive advantage. Can you think of any organisations that don't do all of that, that actually on the bottom 5 arrows, they focus on 1 or 2 of them rather than all of them? Anyone?
I suppose like an online company maybe. I don't know if this is right. I'm thinking like eBay. Like they don't supply, they don't get from, they don't manufacture anything, but they market and sell the products.
Absolutely, and
they provide a service to the customer.
Yes,
but absolutely. They don't do any distribution. They don't manufacture anything.
And if we look at, yeah, that's a really good example. If we looked at Amazon, their core competency was around marketing and selling, and then actually based on that, they've then got a holding service, haven't they, where they do distribute. So they've extended what they do, and then in order to provide more service to the customer. So yeah, so online are really good, because and then you can imagine on the sort of a small manufacturer end, they're probably more 1 and 2, the suppliers and the manufacturers. So it's just good to look at it and just not assume that everybody does everything, that actually sometimes people are better placed focusing on specific parts of it. And actually some organisations, you know, it costs them so much to get good salespeople that they might as well instead focus on the core sort of manufacturer and have some good alliances where they give 30-50% of the market, whatever it is, to another organisation who then does the marketing and selling for them. I think it's just been, yeah, as I say, like being brave enough to just focus on what you're actually good at. And sometimes that is a key strategic change from trying to do everything really well to realising you're in a market that's changed and you haven't got the power anymore. So, you know, you sort of instead, you narrow the scope of what you do.
I think looking at that, Hannah,
yeah.
Out of all it, for Audi especially, it's probably the first one, isn't it? So looking at lower prices at a high quality, really. But they would try and do obviously all of them. But if they lose the first part about the high quality and low prices, then they'll probably end up giving much more poor service to the people, really, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. And I think the only thing they don't do is you externally, you get suppliers in, don't you, to do the manufacturer. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. We also, with the marketing as well, that's externally done. That's not done by Audi.
I was wondering that. Yeah, I was wondering if you use an agency to do that. In which case,
we use an agency, yeah.
And then distribution to customers you do through your stores. Distribution to you use logistics company, don't you?
We're also bringing in click and collect now.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, wow. That's starting from next month. It's a trial at the minute, so that's going to be fun times, isn't it?
That'd be really interesting. So how does that change your business model?
It's not changing our store, but it's like a handful of stores across the region are doing it. It doesn't really change it. No, they've got like 3 car parking spaces, which they put in the car parks, and we have to just come out and give them the shopping. Essentially, they do it all online, and then we come out and we give it them. There's no sort of like setup or anything like that yet. It's meant to be 5 years in the making, this click and collect, and we've done it in 5 months to try and have the competitive edge with Tesco, who have got all the online, and with Asda, who have got online and things like that. So we've pulled it forward massively at the minute.
Is your store one of the ones that's doing it?
No, it was meant to be, but it's not anymore. So it's Bedworth is low, to be fair. Bedworth and Airport, my old store, that's doing it as well.
Yeah.
So,
okay, that's really interesting. And this is about because of the places have got that competitive advantage, haven't they? In the sense of people don't want the inconvenience, do they? And it's what you're doing on that is you're adding value through high levels of customer service. But are there any ways in which Aldi's been innovative in terms of being first to market with a certain concept, or are you generally followers in terms of if it works then you do it?
I think I'd say we're more followers personally. We tend to just wait to see, we waited during all of coronavirus, we waited for Tesco to reduce all of their hours and like the shop floor opening times and things like that before we then reduced like the opening times and things like that. The only thing that we did first was we were the first ones to let people buy whatever they wanted again. So we did unit limit to like two products per customer and things like that. And then we were the first supermarket, I think, to sort of say, okay, right, you can just have what you want now because our availability is looking a lot better.
Okay.
But no, we do tend to follow, really.
And the reason that's because of your cost leadership position, I think, because actually if you are a differentiated position, you have to put a lot in terms of your cost on service, and that doesn't fit with your business model, does it?
No, not at all.
So that's quite interesting. Oh, thank you. That's a really good point. Now, carrying on this theme of what makes a company unique and gives it advantage, there's a framework that you can use. And the first time I studied this was at master's level, so it's quite a useful sort of acronym to look at if you want to see if it really does make you stand out. So let's just look at Freddie's example of the click and collect at Aldi. Is it valuable in terms of adding value to the customer experience? What do you reckon, Freddie?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I'd say so, because at the minute with everything going on with coronavirus, whether they can actually come to the store or not and go into the store, they might not be sort of brave enough at the minute.
Yeah, and are they able to just sit in their car while it's brought out to them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Is it rare though?
No, not at all.
Not in the slightest. No. Is it inimitable? Oh God, what a word! Is it? Yeah. Is it that one beginning with an I? Inimitable.
No, because it can't be copied.
Yeah. If you've done it in 5 months and it's a 5-year plan, that suggests it's not okay. And are you organised in terms of taking advantage of it and doing it?
Don't know yet. Find out when it gets rolled out.
That's where you could argue whether it is valuable or not. It depends on how successful it works, how many slots are actually available, how easy it is to get a click and collect space. I suppose that's everything they'll be looking at, monitoring, I suppose.
And actually, in terms of the infrastructure, we're just looking at it from an operational point of view in terms of getting from the store to the customer. But creating a significant, I mean, already you can buy some limited items online from Aldi, but creating a full online retail experience is a different sort of, that would have cost some money to get that set, or a lot of time and resource to get that set up to allow them to even do this. So I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't the start of other things, because once you've got that platform, why would you just limit it in one way in terms of how you're going to use it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden we started doing deliveries and things like
that. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But I know Morrison's were expecting a 5-year payback when they start, because Morrison's were late to the market on that, weren't they, with their vans and things? But 5 years they were expecting to get their money back, which seems a long time, but it's just such a big infrastructure. And the whole reason why Argos did it, and did the sort of I think it's 1 or 2 hours that you get things delivered from the local store to your house, is because they want to compete with Amazon Prime. So a lot of what I'm getting is a lot of strategies are responsive to what the market is. I think there's very, very few where they're truly unique and they truly differentiate them. Has anyone
some companies supermarkets outsource their delivery and things, though, don't they?
Yeah.
So if you look at, is it Waitrose and Sainsbury's? I think one of them uses, is it Ocado?
Yeah, and so whoever did the Ocado sort of entity, I think, is now coupling up with M&S to do their deliveries. Yeah, you're right. So this is back to this sort of almost the value chain, really, that rather than doing it in-house and thinking we're going to be really good at the distribution, we partner up with a company that's already done it and then pay per unit, and we don't have to buy the infrastructure and we don't have to pay for the maintenance. So yeah, you're absolutely. So there are different ways of getting the same goal, which the customer expects and wants. Thank you. Back to Vireo. Can anyone think of a competitive advantage that truly meets those criteria that their organisation's got?
I think anything that's got a patent on it, it's imitable for a foreseeable future.
Yes.
So I know a lot of the so some companies within sort of pharmaceuticals, they'll patent a drug. So there's one company that had the market share pretty much of parasite control, that did everything for one spot on for a pet, and literally the year that their patent expired, there was so many other companies that were copying it, but for the first so many years that nobody could really touch them when it came to selling a product that was similar or as good.
Is that the same as Ford when they had obviously when you get in the car and you've got it all steamed up and things like that, and you can have the back mirror, you can have the back window, you can have and clear that up quite easily with the touch of a button in most cars. But then Ford, didn't they have the front one, so you could literally press the button and then it would clear the front straight away instead of de-icing and things like that. And they actually had it sort of, nobody could copyright it for so many years or something like that, I don't think.
Yeah, the heated windscreen.
That's it, yeah. Heated. Cheers, Jason. Cheers.
Well, your technical knowledge is coming to it. But yeah, but there will be, I'm sure, within the sort of automotive world, there are going to be bound to be things that are just like certain features and things that a lot of investment goes into to make sure that they stand out, especially when you're talking about the premium end, aren't there? It's got to be stuff that you do.
I mean, there's a thing like with JLR, obviously, where myself, George, and Dave, and both Dave's work, we do premium palette. So we kind of do premium palette and we do bespoke colours on the customer vehicle. So, we're trying to be unique from the core plant. So what I mean by that is you've got normal colours that any customer can have, but then you've also got an extended palette, which is called the premium palette. Mm-hmm. Or you've also got customers that could pay to have a bespoke colour.
Was there some crushed diamonds or something that you spoke about once?
There was an exploration of kind of how we could paint cars with basically diamonds in the paint. So it never really kind of come to fruition in the end, but I can't remember the cost of it, but it was absolutely insane. And the actual visual impact of it wasn't much different to like a glass kind of content paint.
Okay.
So I think that's why we kind of got stuff away. But I think another thing for me, in terms of like the framework we talk about, I think the branding of something. So let's say, for example, like Rolex, it's valuable. I mean, it holds its value. It's rare in the fact that, it's unique itself. It's like one of the best brands. It can be copied.
But not wow. Can't
but not wow. Exactly. It's not its value, is it? And I think the business itself, I know that there's a massive kind of waiting list, but they've always got constant customer flows of orders, and the reputation of the brand's been around for such a long time. The brand sells itself and always has done, and that's why that you bought Rolex 10 years ago, it's probably doubled by now.
Yeah. That's a really good example. I think the pharmaceutical example and that example of sort of premium products and the brands associated. It used to be Morgan cars some years ago. There was a 7-year waiting list if you wanted a Morgan made for you. And it's sort of, there's almost something that if we, in the organisation side of it, so the fourth one of these, if we restrict supply we can increase demand, because there's this idea of this sort of limited capacity, which makes things more attractive if you're on a waiting list, because it shows other people want it. You feel a bit one up when you've got it as well. So yeah, I think they're the sort of highly branded or brands with a sort of superior reputation plus pharmaceuticals are really good examples of that.
I think as well, people are trying to invest in things that they know they can hold their money in. So gold, for example, you know, jewelry, watches. So it's people just trying to secure their money rather than putting in the banks, because as you know, the interest rates are basically zilch at the moment.
Yeah. So that again can increase the value at that point of that type of asset.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think in terms of using this, I think a lot of organisations think they've got a competitive advantage, or they do something where they've got something that makes them stand out. And I think if we were to use this framework and we were to use it in quite a critical way, I think we'd find far fewer organisations have it than think they have, if that makes sense. And it's certainly not something that's sustainable for very long either. So yeah, I think that's quite a nice one to be aware of and to use. And actually, where those capabilities might come from, it might be from the relationships that we've got. So our supplier networks, the reach that we've got, and our distribution chains. As we've just heard with the Rolex example, it could be from the reputation that makes them stand out, or it could be something like the sort of Dyson advantage is really around their strategic position, is around their engineering capability, and that the fact that it's run by engineers and that's at the core of it can give them more ability to innovate. And some of those ideas are going to mean that they do particularly well and they are seen as like absolute excellence in the market. Other ones won't work, because as soon as you do something with a level of risk and you're first to market, this is what I was saying to Freddie about being a follower or a leader. Being first to market means you've got to educate the market that they even want it and they need it, and that is so expensive. And if you've got a model where you are leading on cost, you're not going to be able to do that. You want a model there where you're leading on premium pricing, because then you can recover your cost of development and you've got a premium position brand.
So what if you were forced to change something because it was going to affect the reputation that you have?
Give me an example.
So for the one that I've picked for my assignment, they were forced to change a policy because of really negative media and sort of threats of sort of avoiding their brand because of what had happened.
Right.
So could you use that as in talk about that one of their really good capabilities was they got a really good reputation until this incident occurred and they had to change?
And I'll tell you what that ties back to. The whole fundamental of this course is based on a concept of prescriptive versus emergent. So it's this idea of actually we've got a plan, we're going to stick to our plan, it's well thought through, it's well researched, that's our prescriptive. And then things come and screw things up a bit, and that's where we have to have an emergent approach. So we've still got our plan, but then we have to respond in a certain way. So you're absolutely right, all these models, everything is only time bound according to what the market wants at that time, according to where your position is in the market. But yeah, it can very quickly be sidelined. And I imagine a number of the strategies that you're going to be looking at, especially if they were developed over 12 months ago, are going to be absolutely fantastic because they've been well thought through. And then actually, if we look at them in the last 6 to 8 months, they may have had to change their strategy. And so they might have gone from prescriptive to having to be somewhat emergent. And that might be part of your conclusion.